Okay, so at the very bottom of 60B1, we're a little bit more than halfway down the page. It's about the 10 lines up from where the lines get medium sized. The last word on the line is Tana Rabbanan. So Tana Rabbanan, Nasna Benela Menakes, O Gumalato, O Mace. If she uh gave her son to a wet nurse, or she weaned him, or if her son died. She's allowed to get married immediately. Because remember, the Gemara on top here of the very top of the Amud, there's a bit of a machlokas, but we paskin that she's not allowed to get married until, get um, remarried until 24 months after the baby was born. Because we're worried that uh, things might happen and if she would get pregnant again or this or that, she would lose the milk and then it would be dangerous for the baby because the baby wouldn't have a source of proper nutrition. If the baby's father was alive, under most cases, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, it's not a problem because Rashi said the father will spring to buy cheese, milk, and eggs to keep the baby healthy. But let's say if he died, so she's not allowed to get remarried because if she does and she gets pregnant and then the baby and then her milk will dry up, then it'll be dangerous for the baby, for the current toddler, 1.5 year old or whatever, who won't have the milk. But this Brisa says, but if she hired a wet nurse, or he was already weaned, or her son died, so if her son died, there's no worry. She doesn't need to keep her milk anymore because her son her child that she was nursing died. She's immediately allowed to remarry, or not just marry, but it says the word nesuin. It doesn't talk about kedushin, but it says nesuin. Rav Papa v'Rav Huna bered Rav Yeshua savar lemeved uvda ki hamas nisa. Rav Papa and Rav Huna bered Rav Yeshua wanted to paskin like this brisa. Amr lahu hahi savta. A certain elderly lady told them. So a lot of times there's a Gemara gives an anonymous old man told them, but here it's an anonymous old woman, a savta. So it also seems that the word sab and savta may have come from the Aramaic. They may originally be Aramaic words, not Hebrew words. BDD have a uvda. This happened to me. The Austerly Rav Nachman. And Rav Nachman said I was not allowed to get remarried. So meaning either her child had died or she weaned the kid, but Rav Nachman did not allow her to get remarried until the 24 months passed. So also we see that that the woman is trustworthy to give over a psak. I mean, this comes up in other halachos also. In Hilchos Nida, if let's say she had a shaila, if a certain spot was a reddish color and would be tame, or it was a not a tame color, so she could tell her husband, I asked the chacham, and he said it was okay, and she's believed. So this isn't the only case, but it's important. One witness is believed for Isser. So so a woman could be a mashkicha for food or this or that. The same principle. But here she's telling over the story happened and this was the psak I got. It's a little interesting, right? Rav Nachman Shar Lahu Reish Galusa. So the question was, so we believe her, but the question is, we know that someone from the house of the Reish Galusa had hired a wet nurse, and meaning so the Reish Galusa was a political position, was a high position, not just political, exilarch is what they call it, whatever that means, the head of the Galus in Bavel. And so someone from their family, her husband or whatever, they hired a wet nurse. And I don't know, her husband must have died. And so she wanted to get remarried less than 2 years later, and he allowed her to get remarried. So that was less than 24 months later. So the Gemara says, Shani be Reish Galusa de lo hadar bahu. It's different when the person is the Reish Galusa because they're not going to back out of the contract, meaning you hired a wet nurse. So Stam, the wet nurse might end up saying, "Oh, I can't do it anymore. You have to find someone else," But if it's a Reish Galusa, a powerful and wealthy family, they're not going to back out. So for anyone other than the Reish Galusa, we're worried that even if they hired a wet nurse, the wet nurse might not fulfill the terms of their agreement. But for the Reish Galusa, we're not worried. Amr lahu Rapapi v'asun lo tispera mehadatanya, and Rapapi said, don't you learn it from a following brisa? If there's someone who used to always go back to her father's house, so it's not just that she used to go to her father's house, but she would go there for long periods of time. So the brisa is going to list a bunch of cases where the husband and wife were physically in faraway places, and for a prolonged period, and then the husband dies. Or there was some type of fight with the husband, so she had left the husband's house. Or if the husband was in jail for a while, or he traveled overseas, or he was old or sick, so he was not going to be she wasn't going to become pregnant from him. Or if she was barren, or she was elderly, meaning too old to have a kid, or she was an islandess, a woman who was sterile, never be able to have children. So akara and islandess might be different. In some cases, they might be the same, but I would say in this case, they're probably different. Akara might be, for example, we know that she had a hysterectomy, so we know she can't have any kids. Whereas an islandess never reached the stage of physical maturity or to I mean halachically in Ireland she never brought the simane naros, the signs of nara or bogeris. But either way, an akara and islanders can't have kids. But it could be that an akara, meaning in the chumash, akara could be someone who never had children. Let's say Sarah, but Sarah was reached this was not an island. She showed the stages, the signs of Naros and Bagros. So perhaps Akara in this case means we know that she had a hysterectomy, so we know that she's not going to have any children. Yeah, or besides having a hysterectomy, it could be a case. This brings it down from Arashi and Erevin. It would say that she was married to three people, to three different men, and she was married to them for a period of time and never had kids from any of them. So, I mean, nowadays you do testing, and sometimes you could figure out if the infertility is from the man or from the woman. But the halacha in those days was if she was married to three different men. I don't know if it had to be for 10 years or not, and she didn't have kids. So the chazaka is she's never going to have kids, is that she's barren. Or katana, or she is a katana. She's too young to have brought the simanim of naros. Or if she had a miscarriage after her husband died, or someone who is not capable of giving birth. Oh, Rashi says, okay, so I mix it up. Rashi says that on this, she's not able to have a kid because she had either hysterectomy, either a medical one or an accident, but we know that she doesn't have a womb anymore. They all have to wait 3 months after their husband died to make sure they're not pregnant before they remarry to someone else. Because I think we mentioned this last time. So there that we in case she would get married very soon and have a baby right away, we don't want to have a suffix. Is it a full-term baby from the first husband, or is it an early baby from the second husband? So we wait 3 days, 3 months, and Lamaisa, it's 94 days for various reasons, but we 94 days. So because if she would be pregnant by the time her husband dies, by 94 days later, is three months into the pregnancy, she would be showing that she's pregnant or not. So if she's pregnant, then we know it's from the first husband, and if she's not, and she would get pregnant later and even have an early baby, we know it's from the second husband. So in these cases, even though it's very unlikely that she would have had that she would, let's say she went to her father's house for several months, let's say for 3 months or for 4 months, and then her husband died. We know that she hasn't been near her husband, so should we have to wait? We shouldn't have to. Rabbi Meir says doesn't matter. You still have to wait. Rabbi Yossi matir liras minaseh miyad. Rabbi Yossi allows her to have erison or chuppah immediately, because we know that he was in jail or he was Medina Sayyam, and if someone came back and said that that he died, and we know that he wasn't here for 6 months, and we see she's not pregnant, so you don't have to wait. The only time you'd have to wait, according to Rabbi Yossi, is to make sure that she's not pregnant from her first husband. But if her husband they were physically separated for a while, she couldn't be pregnant from him. She the Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Meir b'gzeirosa. Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, even though we don't always pass like Rabbi Meir, but when the reason that he's giving it is exera to strengthen other halachos, we pass like Rabbi Meir. So from this halacha, shouldn't we see that it doesn't matter the reason, but so even though this was a halacha of a pregnant woman getting remarried, but in regard to a woman who is nursing a child and her husband dies, if she could get remarried, it shouldn't be any different. We should have to wait the 2 full years no matter what. So the Gemara says, Amrile lavadaitin. So they said, we didn't know that, Brisa. So it seems that they're saying that's a good proof. That's a good proof, but we didn't know that, Brisa, so we didn't give it as a proof. The Hilchasa and the halacha meis mutter, if the husband died, if the child died, she's allowed to get remarried. She doesn't have to wait the 24 months. Gamlaso Asur, if she weaned him, she is not allowed to get remarried because we're worried that the child wasn't really ready to be weaned, but she was in a rush to wean him because she wanted to get remarried. So by her weaning the child too early, it'd be putting the child at medical risk of not being able to get proper nutrition. And we're worried that she might try to wean the kid too early. So we say she can't get remarried just because she weaned him. Mar bar Ravashi Amar Afilu Meis Nami Asur Dilma Kat Lale V'Azla Minasva. Mar bar Ravashi said even if the child dies, she's also within the 24 months. She's not allowed to get remarried till the 24 months are complete, because maybe she Chas v'Shalom would kill the kid to waive the waiting period. Hava Uvda v'Chan Kasei. And there was such an incident like this, and she strangled her kid in order to be able to get remarried. But the Gemara says, "Velohi, we don't pass in that way. Hahi shota havai." That woman had mental problems, but woman is not going to chasu shalom do that to one of her children. We know from our media cases. I mean, from the news, if a woman does something like that, it's full headline news. They covered the whole trial. It's a very rare event. Lo aleinu. The lo abdi nashe dechankan benayu. Mothers don't do this to their children. Okay, so then there's a machlokas to Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. I don't know how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. So the question is, what if a woman got divorced? Does she have to wait 24 months to get remarried or not? So Rabbeinu Shimshon Hazaken said that she is, because our Mishnah in this parak lists the fact of nursing is dependent on the husband, and once she gets divorced, she's not dependent on the husband. This responsibility of nursing the kid, which was based as responsibility towards the husband, now that she's not married to him, it doesn't exist. So she's allowed to get remarried with less than 24 months. And Rabbeinu Tam says not, because there's a different Gemara in Yevamos, and I think I mentioned this last time, that if a woman who is pregnant or a woman who is nursing her kid is not allowed to get married until 24 months. So Rabbeinu Tam says, that Gemara says it doesn't matter if she it doesn't matter if she was divorced or widowed. There's no difference. So Rabbeinu Tam paskins, even if she's divorced, she's not allowed to get remarried until 24 months later. So I mentioned last time, I think, that there was a case that the woman she gave up on getting married. So, and this was in Israel. She had artificial insemination. She was pregnant, and then she met a guy who happened to be a widower, and he had a small kid or kids from his wife. His wife, they had kids, and then his wife got cancer and she died. And then he met her, and they wanted to get married, and she was pregnant. And Rav Ovadia Yosef gave a heter. So basically, I heard there were two different things, and I realized they're the same case. On the websites, we saw Rav Ovadia paskin that a pregnant woman could get remarried, because even though we're worried that it might be dangerous for that that the new husband would want to try to have a baby right away, and then it would make her milk dry up for her first baby. But Rav Ovadia Yosef paskin that nowadays it's not a problem because it's very easy to get baby formula, so we're not worried that it's going to be a problem. So they're allowed to get married. But again, it was a case where there was no, she wasn't divorced and she wasn't widowed. But that shouldn't make a difference. But Rav Ovadia Yosef paskin, I don't know if the tshuva was written down, but it was in the news. And so then there was a difference. Someone told us, so and so got remarried, and his wife was really big. We saw pictures from the chuppah, and the wife was really big. She was pregnant. Then we realized that him and the psak of Rav Ovadia Yosef was probably about the same case. So I think I mentioned that story last time with the psak of Rav Ovadia Yosef, but there is a machlokas Rabbeinu Shimshon and Rabbeinu Tam, and I don't know how the Shulchan Aruch and the Nosei Kalim paskin, but about that situation. Okay. We are now 60b3. We're about 9 lines up from the bottom of Samach Hamad Beis. Tana Rabbana. If someone was hired to nurse someone's kid, she's not allowed to nurse her own kid at the time or her friend's kid. Paska Kima Ochelas Harbe. Even if they only decided that she's going to give a little bit of milk, she has to eat a lot in order to produce the right amount of milk. And she's not allowed to eat while she's nursing this kid things that are bad for the milk. So that's the Brisa says. So the Gemara asks, Hashta bena amar lo ben chaver tami baya. If when she was hired to nurse someone else's kid, she's not allowed to nurse her own kid, she certainly shouldn't be allowed to nurse her friend's kid. Now, it seems, I don't know for sure, but it seems that she's not hiring herself out as a wet nurse to two different people. Is everything okay, Chemda? But if she can't nurse her own kid, why couldn't she nurse someone else's kid? Why did it have to be mentioned? So the Gemara says, Mahu desema benahu dechais iloya mamsile tfei, avo ben chaverta ila dehavala moser lahava mamsile kamash malan. So we might think that for her own kid, she'll have Rahmanis on, and she might give her own kid a little bit more and take away from the amount of milk she would give to the kid who she was hired out to nurse. But ben chaverta, but her friend's kid, if she wouldn't have had extra milk, she wouldn't have offered to help her friend. So Kamash Malan, that she's not allowed to nurse her friend's kid either. She thinks she has enough milk for both. That's a problem. It happened to be. I mean, there's a few stories. Let's say there's triplets or whatever, and sometimes nowadays again, we have formula, but yeah, a year ago there was big shortages. Right, there was a big problem. There was a contamination in one factory and other things. Right, that's true. So we still can't take it for granted that it's not going to be a shortage. But so sometimes they ask if there's triplets and they were trying to feed them uh, breast milk, they ask another woman, do you have extra milk that you could pump and give the kid? And then someone told us, this is going back to the Soviet Union, the land of plenty and the workers' paradise, that someone had a baby and their friend or their sister or their cousin was pregnant. So they pumped extra and they filled up the freezer. And then I forgot what happened and they didn't need the milk. So they made it into kefir. And so we learned last time that the milk is kosher. So even though people aren't, well, we said the machlokas between the Rambam and the Ramban, if people aren't treif, but it may not be mutter to eat them. We mentioned the machlokas Ramban last time, but we said, even if it's not at most, it would be what an isra aseh according to the Rambam, but there's no prohibition against having that milk, a human milk. Okay, so then the Brisa said, Paska kima chelas harbe, even if they hired her to give a little bit of milk, she has to eat a lot. Mehecha, do they have to pay for the extra food that she has to eat or not? Rav Sheshes mishalah. So she has to pay for her extra food. So I guess if they whether I assume they would make a monetary arrangement for her to be the wet nurse, but if they didn't make anything about paying for the extra food, the nursing mother has to pay for the food out of her own pocket. Lo tochel imo dvarm haraim. You can't eat things that are bad for the for milk. So what are they? So I'll read it out of the ArtScroll side. Amrav Kahana Kagon Kishus v'chazut v'dagim ketana v'adama. Things such as hops, grain sproutings, small fish, and earth. Adama is dirt. Now we'll talk about hops. Now in those days, they didn't make beer out of hops, but beer is going to be mentioned later on. In those days, I think most of the beer was probably made out of dates. If you remember, it's probably at least 10 years ago already. They realized the prisoners at Cook County Jail looked drunk, and they investigated and they found that the fresh fruit that they were giving the inmates were fermenting them in their cells, and they were making it into alcoholic beverages. But nowadays they make beers out of hops, but I don't think they did that in those days. Abai Amar afilu krava chabusha, even squash and quince. Rapapa Amar, Rapapa says afilu kora v'kufra, even palm shoots and unripened dates. So these palm shoots. So I tried to investigate once, and I don't know when they sell these things, hearts of palm. I don't know exactly what they are, but what these things are is that as the tree grows, every year, like the tree, I guess, gets a little bigger, and something that was from like last year. So I mean, I looked very much at Kermbiavna because there were trees on campus, and there were some that were very big, some that were newer, and the way it seems to me that the way they grow, is that the parts that bend over with the palm. So the lulav is a closed palm branch, and that's in the middle. In the I guess in the spring, whatever, in the new year, that grows up. The next year, later in the season, that the leaves open down and the leaves open up. And then eventually those start, from the weight of it, they droop over. And then the next year, there's a new, what we will call lulav, or several lulavim in the front, in the middle, and they bend over. So it seems that after they bend over and after a few years, they get hard. And then in big winter storms, if it's windy and this or that, they could break off or whatever. And so the outside of the tree seems to be these branches that became a lulav that had bent out and the end part cracked. That's how it appeared to me, how the trees grow. So so the Korah is that the newer things, it's not fruit, it's part of this tree, but it's soft, and so it could be eaten. So it's not a fruit, but it's later it will become like the bark or the wood of the tree, but at this point it's young, it's not. So I don't think that hearts of palm that we have in the cans are from that at all, but not exactly sure. Rav Ashi Amar Afilo Kamcha B'Harsana. Even Kamcha is kutach, so that was I think we saw it within the last few weeks. It was like a made out of like yogurt and moldy bread. So it's a milchik thing. And again, that comes up a lot in Psachim because you talk about is it chametz or not? Because the bread itself is moldy and disgusting, and no one would eat it as bread anymore. So does it still have identity in regard to chametz on Pesach? But it's also it happens to be that it's milchiks also, but kutach or harsana are some type of little fish that are fried. Rashi says they are fish that are fried in flour and fish brine and their own fat. In other cases, karsa de harsana, I think it's in regard to making something special for Shabbos, even if you make this little fried fish, which is it's a relatively simple thing to make, but if you make it l'chavod Shabbos, it's considered that you made something extra in honor of Shabbos. But for the pregnant women, it's not a good thing. It's not good for their milk. Minayu paske chalva. Some of them are bad because they stop the milk. Minayu achre chalva, and some of them make the milk spoil. So some of them don't. So some of them reduce the quality of the mother's milk, and some of them reduce the quantity. Okay, now we have some other strange agaritas that are not really relevant to our to the halacha to the concept of him. If they have relations by a mill, they're going to have so our scroll translated this as epilepsy. Rashi calls it name Pishion or Pision. It seems to be a little bit more like a seizure. Well, epilepsy is a seizure. So yeah. Dimshashi al ara, if they have relations on the ground, Havale b'nei shemute, they're going to have long necks, which is a blemish. Darka al rama dechamra, if she walks on a donkey excrement. Havale b'nei girdane, she'll have kids who lose their hair. So either that they lose their hair or they're bald. Rashi seems to say two possibilities. Yeah, Rashi, Art Scroll translates the other Rashi as some type of skin problems. These are words that come up in Parshas Tazria, both of them. But Da'achli Chardalef, if she eats mustard, Havulu b'nei Zal Zalone, she'll have kids who are very ravenous and hungry. Art Scroll translates as gluttons, but Rashi just says they're very, very hungry. The achle tachli, if she eats cress, havulu b'nei dulfini. So I assume that these cases, this is what she eats when she's pregnant. I don't think Rashi says that, but I assume that these things, if she eats while she's pregnant, she eats cress, havulu b'nei dulfini. They'll have kids who are always full of water or tears. The achle munie, if she eats small fish, munine havulu b'nei metzia ena. They'll have kids whose fluttering eyes from Rashi. So if you read fluttering eyes, it seems that they open and close. But the way I see from what Rashi says, they move back and forth. The eyes are like constantly moving. I guess it could be the eyelids, except I don't see that Rashi necessarily says that way. The achla gargushta, if she eats clay, have libene b'charai, she'll have ugly children. The shasi shichra, if she drinks beer, have libene ukme, she'll have dark children. So in those days, it's not that they had Guinness, but I think the beer that they had was from dates, so it was dark just from the dates. So I don't know enough about the other stuff, but the achla bisr b'shas chamer, if she eats meat and drink wine, havile b'nei As we turn to Samach Aleph and Aleph, Brie, she'll have healthy children. The Achla Beye, if she eats eggs while she's pregnant, Havalu B'nei an Einane, she'll have children with big eyes. Rashi doesn't say this is a mum, so we don't know that it's a bad thing. Or the Achla Kavre, if she eats fish, Havile B'nei Chinane, they'll have kids who people will find favor with them. So our school translate as charming, which is not necessarily a bad translation, but in the Berchus Kohanim, they should have chen. People should find favor with them. So that's the word here. The achla karpasov, she eats karpas. Our school translates it as celery, but it's karpas, what we say in the Haggadah. Havule b'nei zivsane, they will have bright, physically bright, radiant children. The Mishar Sashas mentions, so they will have like a shining countenance, and so the explanation, according to the Mishar Sashas, is they will be very nice and beautiful children. The Achle Kus Barta, if she eats coriander, Havale B'nei Bisrane, she will have fat children. The Achle Esroga, if she eats an esrog, Havale B'nei Rechane, they will be very nice smelling children. Barte Deshvar Malka Achla Ba'ime Esroga. So this is a pretty weird way of saying it, but the daughter of Shvar Malka, her mother ate esrog. Basically means King Shavor, his wife, ate the esrog while she was pregnant, so their daughter smelled very nice. But if you read the literal translation, it's a little. Barate de Shvar Malka, the daughter of Shvar Malka, Achla ba ima esroga. Her mother ate with her esrog. And when they would bring all types of fragrant, nice smelling stuff to the father, they'd bring his daughter first because she smelled so nice. Okay. I looked, and the Maharsha did not give explanations about this Gemara, about these Gemaras. Okay. Amar Rav Huna. So we're on the seventh line from the top. On Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Baraklan Rav Huna Bar Chinana. Rav Huna Bar Chinana gave us a test. He checked us. He Amers Lahanek, Fu Amers Lahanek. So this is a Lamaisa Dika question. If the wife wants to nurse the baby, Fu Amers Lahanek, and the father doesn't want her to nurse, he wants to hire a wet nurse. Shomin la, we listen to her because tsara didahu. It's her pain if she's filled with milk and she's not nursing. So if she wants to nurse, she can nurse. Hu amar lahanik v'hi amar shelo lahanik. If he wants her to nurse and she doesn't want to, mahu, what's the halacha? Kolhecha delav orche shomin la. When it's her family's custom not to nurse, then we listen to her. Her family's not used to nursing, so she doesn't have to nurse either. The husband has to hire a wet nurse for her behalf. But he orcha v'hulav orche mai. But if her family's minhag practice is to nurse, and his family's is not to, but he wants her to nurse, and it's her family's minhag to nurse, what do we say? Mai, what's the halacha? Basar didei or basar dida azinu? Do we follow him or her? His minhag was not to, but he wanted her to, and her family's minhag was to nurse, but she doesn't want to. Upashtinan luhumeha, and we answered the question. We found the pshat from the following brisa. Ola ima ve'enu redis imo. She goes up with him in marriage, but she does not go down with him. So it seems that the wealthier people, their wives didn't nurse. They would hire wet nurses. So even if her minhag was to nurse, but his family's minhag was not because they were a wealthier family. So even though he wants her to nurse, and she was her family used to nurse, but because she married into a, a more aristocratic, if I could use that word, family, so she gets to go into that higher. She in modern tax parlance, we'd say that she's in a higher tax bracket now. So because she's in the higher tax bracket, she lives like the higher tax bracket, and she doesn't have to nurse her kid. The husband has to hire a wet nurse for her because that's his family's practice, even though he wants her to nurse, and her family was from a lower tax bracket and they used to nurse. Is that clear? Amrav Huna Ma'ikra. Do we have a pasuk? Even though obviously this isn't a thing that we have from a pasuk, it's not a halacha that we learn from a pasuk. Is there either a mnemonic or something from a pasuk or in a pasuk that hints to this? So the Gemara says v'hibul as baal by I think this was by Sarah and Avimelech, I think. So how could you have taken Sarah? She's Beulah's Baal. So a Baal is a husband, and Beulah, well, in some cases, the word Beulah, when we learned the first parak, a Beulah would be someone who was not a virgin. So, but she's Beulah's Baal. So why does it say the word Beulah's Baal and not Eshes Ish, the wife of a man? How come it use the term Beulah's Baal? She goes up with the elevation of the husband, and she does not go down with the downwardness of the husband. So the idea that she goes up in marriage is so Beula is also related to the word aliyah. It's a different word, but it's spelled the same way. Aliyah, to go up, is ayin lamed. Beula's baal is also ayin lamed, even though it's different. So she goes up with the husband. So let's say if she was from an aristocratic family and she married someone from a lower tax bracket that their women nursed the kid, she would be exempt from nursing her kid. The husband would have to pay for it because that's what she's used to. She doesn't change tax brackets. She doesn't go down a tax bracket based on who she marries. Rabbi Elazar Amar. Rabbi Elazar says mehacha from a different pasuk. Hi haisa im klachai. Chava, Adam named the woman Chava, Kihi Haisa Aim Kalchai. She was the mother of all living things. L'chaim nitna v'lo l'tzar nitna. She was given to live and not for pain. So basically, instead of being tsar, she only goes up in class. When she get married, she wouldn't go down in class. Okay, so there were 7 malachos mentioned in the Mishnah of what she has to do for her husband on Nun Tesamid Beis. So she has to grind, which we said either make supervise the grinding or use a hand grinder, bake, laundry, cooking, nursing the kid, fixing the bed, working with wool. So if she brought in 1 shifcha, she doesn't have to grind or bake or laundry. If she brought in 2, she doesn't have to cook or nurse the baby. If she brought in 3 maids, she doesn't have to make the bed or do the wool. And if she's 4, she gets to sit in the easy chair. And the Gemara is going to say, once we had 3, she doesn't have to do any of the work. What's the difference between that and sitting in the easy chair? So if she brought in a shifcha, so the Rosh and other Rishonim say she doesn't literally have to bring the shvachos into the marriage. Now, I mean, we see in Parshas Vayetze that Leah and Leah and Rachel were given a shifcha by Lavan at the marriage. So from that context, it's possible that a father of the bride might literally send um, shivchos into the marriage, or perhaps according to the opinions that Devora Meinekes Rivka, even though it calls her Meinekes Rivka, the wetnurse of Rivka, but it seems that she was, well, in Huck Finn when they had the two scoundrels, rapscallions, one who pretended to be a duke, and then the other one said that he was the Duff and the missing prince of France, whatever. So when there was a scam, they found out about there was a big someone died and he left a lot of money. They're waiting for his brother to come from England, so they pretended to be the brother from England. So Huck was the valet, I think. But Huck in his misspelling, I think, uh, wrote it Valley or something. But whatever the equivalent would be for the woman, that might be what Devora was for Rivka. So the Rush and maybe other Rishonim say that it doesn't literally mean that she had to literally bring it into the marriage, but it could be that let's say with the dowry was an amount that it's easy to hire maids or servants with that amount. Even in the old stuff from not long before World War II. They had a cook and they had a butler or this and that, the governess, and Mary Poppins, other stuff. So some of this stuff is not so far-fetched. So Hashara Avda. So the question is, if she brought one servant or one maid in, she doesn't have to grind or bake or what was the other thing? Cook. Grind or bake or do laundry. So if she was one person and she would have to do all these things, if she would have one maid, let the maid do all those things and let the wife not have to do anything. Doesn't that make sense? If there's no maid, a woman has to do these seven things. So if there's one maid, let the maid do all seven things. That's the Gemara's question. But let her say, I brought another woman in my place, and she could do all these malachos. I don't have to do anything. So the Gemara says, Mishum da Amar la hatercha ledida kamedidach my tara. Because the husband can say, I have to work, she has to work for me and for herself. Who's gonna pull your weight, let's say? Meaning if it's just me and you, there's two people in the house, so you have to worry about. So for two people, the wife can do all these things. But when there's a third person, the maid, that's too much for one person to do all these. So therefore, she doesn't get out of all of the malachos by bringing in one maid. If she brought in a second maid, she doesn't have to cook or nurse the child. So the Gemara asks again, Hashara Avda, but it seems the rest of the chore she has to do, which would include making the bed and doing the wall. I have a second woman who's working for me and for her, and one who's working for you and for herself. So between the two of them, I shouldn't have to do any work. So the Gemara says, Mishum da Amarla, he could say, Kame orche uparche man tara. But for guests and people who come by, who is going to work? So Rashi points out here that so orche, guests, he says guests that are going to stay for a week or a month, and parche is people who are just passing by, because in a place where there's a bigger household, the practice is that they will host people. So once you have a bunch of maids in the house also, and let's say they didn't even have kids yet, but because the household already is bigger, you're going to be hosting more people. So when the Mishnah, again, was listing these things, that seemed to be when it was just the two of them. But when she already has two or three maids, so then that's going to attract other people to stop in or to stay by them. Or she wants to show off her maids and she'll invite people. That's not what Rashi says, but that's not so far-fetched from human nature either. Shalosh ein matas hamita. If she had brought in three, then she doesn't have to make the bed or work with wool. So the Gemara says Hashara Avda, but it seems that the rest she has to do. Now, if you look in the Mishnah doesn't mention anything more than this. So some Rishonim on the Mishnah mention that those are the main things, but there's other things like bringing him a cup, uh, moving things. I mentioned, I think nowadays it's different. Nowadays the husband has to move the furniture from one thing to the other, but the Rishonim mentioned on the Mishnah that if he would ask her to bring something from one side of the house to the other, she would have to do that. Or setting up, I guess nowadays we have a faucet, but she would maybe set up water for him to wash it. So in those days you had to warm up the water, because otherwise it would just be room temperature. So for him to wash up, she would have to prepare the water. It's not a big thing, but these are the big things, and then there's several smaller things. So I guess from this question of the Gemara, it implies that besides the 7 things listed in the Mishnah, there have to be a few other tasks that you would do, because the Gemara here says Hashara Avda, she has to do the rest. Well, everything the Mishnah was already, we covered them all. So what else is there to do? So Betema lay, let her tell the husband, I brought in another maid for the guests, the long-term guests and the short-term guests. So why do I have to do these other tasks at all? I should just be able to sit on the easy chair. Because when the household becomes bigger, you get more guests, long-term guests, and passerby. But according to that, even if she brought 4, the Mishnah says if she brought in 4 maids, she could just sit in the easy chair. Why don't you say, well, with a bigger household, you're going to be more passerby, and she's still going to have to do stuff. So the Gemara says, Arba Kavan Dinafishilu Mesayin Adadi. Since there's so many, they help each other. So one way of explaining this is that, well, one thing you could say is, I think the easiest way to explain it, and maybe it's the way that I would explain this, is with the microeconomic concept of what's it called? It just was of marginal utility. So when you have a little bit more help, you can increase your productivity a certain amount. When you have more, you could increase your productivity up to a more exponential amount. And then if you have too many people, then it kind of comes into like too many cooks in the kitchen. And then they'll be bumping into each other, and then the marginal utility of having another worker is going to go down. But to me, the Gemara here is saying that the perfect mix of enough help to cover all the chores is 4. So between the 7 main things that they have to do, in case one of them will be too much for that one maid to do, the other maid is going to have extra time and will be able to chip in for those other tasks. Okay, so we're about halfway. No, we're a little bit more than halfway. Amr of Chana. V'itema Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani. Rav Chana said, and some said it was Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Lo hichnisa lo mamish. She doesn't literally have to bring these maids into the marriage. Ela kevan sheru'iyah likanes, since it's fitting that she could have brought them in, even though she didn't actually bring them in. So what I said that the Rush said, it seems pretty clear this is the Gemara here, that she brought in with the dowry enough that they could hire these maids. Tana, we learned in a brisa, echad shechnisa lo, ve'echad. So this is a similar teaching. It's whether she literally brought in the maids into the marriage, or she had a certain amount of spending money, and she saved up money from stuff that she wasn't spending on to hire a maid. So Rashi Tosfos says we learned before that, or we mentioned before that besides for paying for giving her food, because when we learned about that he gets to that if she works, he gets the money, but he has to feed her in place of the money. And the question was which is first, and which is the cause, and which is the effect. But we mentioned that we're going to learn later on, not so far later on, but later on, that besides for giving her money for food, he has to give her money for perfume and things like that. So Tosfos says that if she would, let's say, save money on perfume or other things, that she was able to hire the maid, um, then that's how she was able to save. So she didn't bring in money from the dowry, but the way that she I guess bought the perfume on sale, so she saved money from what the husband gave her. That also counts. And some say that the gears is slightly different. Not tzimtzilolo. So tzimtzum is like being very exact. In Kabbalah, tzimtzum is that Hashem, who's Ein Sof, with no end, he makes himself fit into a limited place. That's what the word tzimtzum in Kabbalah. So tzimtzum, she was scrimped and saved in order to save up the higher thing. But there's a different gersa. Rashi Tosfos mentioned shematz alo. She found for him, meaning he had a lot of money, he had a big income, so she was able to. She didn't have to save anything from her. She say, "Look, your income is so much, we could hire some maids." Arba Yoshevis bekadarta. If she brings in four maids, she's able to sit in the comfortable chair and not have to do the works. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Chananya, Amar Rav Huna, Alpha Bisham Yoshevis bekadarta. Even though she gets to sit in the comfortable chair, Avomozegus loko, she still has to pour his cup of wine for him. Matzah samita, and make his bed. Merchetzes panav yadav raglav, and wash his hands, his face, hands, and feet. So Rashi says she has to spread the sheet, and it's something that's not too difficult. But these things that are listed show that they care for each other. You could use the word that they're intimate tasks, but you don't have to say that. But it's showing care for each other. And this is different than matzahs in the Mishnah, because that's something that includes a burden, but this is not. But the Chachamim are giving, so Rashi says that the Chachamim are giving a big good advice that this is what the spouses should do for each other. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Chananya, Amar Rav Huna, Kam malachos she'isha osa l'bayla, nida osa l'bayla. All malachos that a woman does to her husband, a nida also has to do for her husband, chutz mizigas hakos, except for pouring the bed, v'hatzas amita, and for making the bed, v'chatzas panav yad v'ragla. So because Anita, they have to be separated. So we have several harchakos, things to distance themselves from each other to not lead to intimacy. So when she's Anita, she's not supposed to do these things when she's Anita. But what about making the bed? I'm a Rava lo Amran el b'fana. When she's Anita, Rava says she's not allowed to spread the sheet out if he's there in the room. But if he's not there, there's no problem for her to spread the sheet, even though she's Anita. In regard to preparing his cup of wine, Shmuel, his wife would switch it and do it with the left hand instead of the right hand. Abaye's wife would put it at the head of the container. Rava Ape Sadia, Rava's wife put it on the pillow. Rapapa Asharshifa, Rapapa's wife put it on a stool. So the way I understand this. Oh, so first of all, Rashi says that at least the first one, but probably all of these, Machalfale, she did it with her left hand instead of that this was B'nai Libuna. So it wasn't when she was actually it wasn't when she actually was Anita, but she was still Tmei Anita because it was it was before she was able to go to the mikvah. That's what Rashi says. But it seems that, at least according to the plain reading of this, is that there are certain things, if you do it unusually, then it's allowed. So the way that they made the cup for that for the husbands, they did it in an unusual manner, and therefore, even though there is an element of closeness in the gesture, but they did it in this unusual way to remind the husband or whatever that, I'm Anita right now, and to remind the husband. So we know, for example, there's a part of the harchakos is they're not allowed to eat on the same tablecloth. So placemats, that's why placemats are convenient. Or the halacha is if you put something on the table that's not usually on the table, that works as a hecker to remind them that you can't eat off of each other's plates right now. So one way of understanding what these things from the Gemara are is that the wife did an unusual way, similar to the way that you put something unusual on the table or you eat on different placemats. So when that happens, uh, if you usually eat on placemats, if you eat on placemats when she's Anita, then there's no hecker. You don't realize that anything's different because that's how you always eat. But I guess if they usually eat on the tablecloth, so then if you would eat on the placemats, placemats remind us you eat on yours, I eat on mine. We don't share. So that's one way of understanding these uh these uh these things. Um, let's go a few more minutes. We okay for a few more minutes? Amr Yitzchak Amr Bar Chanani Amr Rav Huna Akol Mashim Mifnei Hashamish Chlut Mibasar V'Yayin. You could leave things out while the shamish, which we would call a waiter, except the um, meat and wine. Meaning the shamish isn't supposed to eat while he's serving. He waits till after the meal to eat, except the basar or yayin that's out, he is allowed to eat it before the people are done eating their meal. Rashi says because he wants it and he'll have tsar if we don't let him. Amrav Chista Basar Shaman V'Yayin Yashan. This is when it's fatty meat and old wine, so very high quality stuff. Amarava Basar Shaman Kalashanakula. Fatty meat the entire year. This halacha is true, but Yain Yashan Bitkufas Tammuz. The old wine we have to let him have it right away is specifically in the summer. So Rashi says because in the summertime the aroma of the wine is very strong, and the heat makes it almost like a venom. Rashi uses the word ka'aras, which is almost like the venom of a snake. So lahavdil, this isn't this halacha, but there is a halacha that lo sachsom shor b'disho. You're not allowed to put a muzzle on the ox as it's threshing. Meaning, we spoke about threshing a couple weeks ago because we were learning about the halacha of dash, that about milking the cow or squeezing the juice out of the fruit. But dash, and the basic thing is you have to break the kernel around the covering around the wheat kernel. So they used to have a heavy thing with spikes, or whatever, and they'd put it behind the ox, and the ox would go around, and that the weight of that would crack it open so they can get the wheat out of that. So you're not allowed to muzzle the ox as it's doing that, because if it sees all this food and you'd muzzle it, it's very cruel. So it seems that to a certain extent, it's a similar halacha. You can't have the shamish serving all this stuff and not let him eat till later. Here might be a little more derech eretz than that, because an animal doesn't have seichel, and so there's more tzar balachayim, and a person does have seichel, but still, okay. Amar Ravanan bar Tachlifa. Ravanan bar Tachlifa says, "Hava ka'amina kamei demar Shmuel." I was once standing in front of the master Shmuel. Va'aitu le tavshili da'arde. They brought him a thing of cooked of mushroom. V'ilav dihavli. If he wouldn't have given it to me, istakanti, I would have been dangerously ill. So Rashi says that he was very, very hungry at the time. So there are also halachas about this in regard to, let's say, a pregnant woman on Yom Kippur. Uh, I don't know how much it's shaykh nowadays, but the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara's talk about it. If she smells something and she wouldn't be able to eat it, she might get extremely dangerously ill. A craving type thing. But Rashi here seems to say that Rav Ana Bar Tachli was very hungry, and they brought down this food. He was so ravenous for it, he would have gotten sick if Shmuel wouldn't have given some of it to him. Rav Ashi says, "Have a kamina kamed Rav Kahana." I was once in front of Rav Kahana, Vaisulu Gargalide, the lifta b'chala. They brought turnip heads in vinegar. For whatever reason, they were round and they were cut very chopped finely. If you wouldn't have given it to me, I would have been dangerously ill. Rapapa Amar Afilu Tamarta Dahinunisa. Even not giving someone a fatty date can make someone sick. So even though the Gemara, the main halacha was the fatty meat and the dry and the old wine in the summertime, but in certain situations, even much simpler dishes could induce this big craving that could make someone seriously ill. Klala de Milsa, the general rule is kol de isle recha isle kiyua, if it has a nice strong smell and I guess it induces your saliva. It would be dangerous to not let someone who's smelling it and getting that reaction out of it it would be dangerous to not let them have it. Avua bar Ihi, Binyamin bar Ihi, Avua the son of Ihi, and Binyamin the son of Ihi, they would feed their waiters. Chad Safim Mikol Mino Mina. One gave from the waiter from every course of the meal. Chad Safim Echad Mina, and one would give him only from the first course. Mar Mishtaya Eliyah Ba'adei. With this, the master Elio would talk Umar Lo Mishtaya Elio Ba'adei. So it seems that we're talking about Elio and Navi. Rashi doesn't say Elio and Navi, but the one who gave the waiter from each and every meal, he was Zocha that Elio Navi would come learn with him. But the one who didn't give his shamish from every course, Elio Navi did not come to him. So you see that it is important if you give him from every course. Hani Tartin Chasida, there were two pious men, Va'amile Ramari, Rapinchas b'nei Rav Chisda. Some said that they were of Mari and Rapinchas, the sons of Rav Chisda, who would feed their waiters. Mar Kadim Safe. One gave him at the beginning of the course, Umar Me'achar Safe, and one gave him at the end of each course. The Kadim Safe Elam Mishtayavadeh, the one who let the waiter eat at the beginning of the course, Elio and Navi would learn with him. The Me'achar Safe Elam Mishtayavadeh, the one who let the waiter have it after the course, Elio and Navi would not learn with him. So we see the importance of letting the waiter eat from the food so he wouldn't get weak.